one woman. But when it comes to current practice, Mr. Speaker, you will find that even in situations where a man is married under the monogamous laws, you find there is either another wife who is under the traditional system or polygamous system, and you will find that there are children that may emanate from such relationship. On very worst scenario, Mr. Speaker, you will find that maybe a man who is married to one wife under monogamous laws of marriage also has mistresses and has had children or has had children out of wedlock. What has happened then is a sort of what I would call a chaotic platform on how determination of rights under succession law then happen to experience, because peradventure, if that man departs from this world, Mr. Speaker, you will find that even children who are born outlook cannot then become inheritors of the estate of that man. So you will find the very, would I say, famous scenario of the little boy child in black suit and bow tie showing up in a funeral, Mr. Speaker, and for the first time, the family of this man experiences other children who are claiming from the man, purporting that the deceased was their father, Mr. Speaker. In many instances, you discover that actually those children could belong, their paternity can be traced to the man who has departed. So the purpose of this law, Mr. Speaker, is first of all to determine what should happen to children who are born out of wedlock. And number two, are the women who have given birth to these children entitled to the estate of the man who is now deceased, Mr. Speaker. And because the law of succession, on the other hand, recognizes monogamy, recognizes polygamy, recognizes children who are born out of wedlock, recognizes other beneficiaries who may have been dependents of the deceased, then, Mr. Speaker, what has happened is that we have had a clash of laws between monogamous laws and the succession laws. So the purpose of this amendment is to align some of those areas. Mr. Speaker, it's also to look at the Children's Act and look at the Constitution, what the Constitution provides for children, whether children, once they are born from a certain lineage and from a certain paternity, are those children as entitled as those who are defined as children under the monogamous law. So, Mr. Speaker, in Section 3 of the Succession Act, that is the Principal Act, we are proposing, Mr. Speaker, an amendment to redefine who a child is. That child to include an adopted child, and that child to also include a child who is conceived during the lifetime of a deceased person and is subsequently born, even if they are born after the death of the deceased person. What does that mean? That if a man was to pass away, when the wife is pregnant, or not even the wife, or even a woman he impregnated, then if that child was conceived by the person who is deceased, Mr. Speaker, or departed, then it means the definition of a child will now include anybody who carries his DNA, Mr. Speaker. Is that important? If we look at the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, a child who carries the DNA will be defined in the Constitution as a child belonging to that person or to that man, and will be entitled to be an inheritor of that estate, notwithstanding that his father passed on. So we'll be seeking a redefinition to be more inclusive, and we're also looking at an adopted child, Mr. Speaker. An adopted child is that child whom the parents have assumed legal responsibility over, a court order has been issued, and that child is now defined to have adoptive parents who are then recognized through a full adoption process in court. Once that child is departed, they become equal or equivalent to the children who are born by the couple, or who are born by the man who has adopted them, or who are born by the man and the woman, or who are assumed. The parental responsibility is assumed by the man and the woman who have adopted, the couple that has adopted that child. So, Mr. Speaker, this definition now is expanded because even though the law had not expanded this definition, many lawsuits have been taken to court to define who a child is. So the law will now clarify that an adopted child should be treated as a child of that couple and should have equivalent rights with the biological child of that couple. Mr. Speaker, in the Principal Act, there is now the term intermeddling, which is introduced, Mr. Speaker, and defined what it means. The intermeddling is in relation to the properties of the deceased. Mr. Speaker, our courts are replete with a lot of data of cases that have been brought before courts at the instance of offenders who are intermeddling with the estate of the deceased. And we know them, even where cases have not been preferred, even where disputes have not been recorded. Yet we know in many family barazas, Mr. Speaker, we have had instances where relatives who perceive themselves to be stronger than the widow, for instance, will intermeddle with the estate of the deceased. And Mr. Speaker, I think every single senator in this House has come across many cases, Mr. Speaker, where the property of the deceased person is interfered with, possession taken, the property is being disposed of, somebody else is trying to forge a title, even charging the property, or even collecting the rents, or collecting any benefits that are emanating from such properties, Mr. Speaker. The concept now of intermeddling has been redefined better in these amendments. They have been redefined to mean taking possession of, disposing of, charging, receiving, distributing, leasing or using property of a deceased without authority under this act or any other applicable law, or even ejecting a surviving spouse or a child from the matrimonial home or matrimonial homes, Mr. Speaker. From the stakeholders' engagement we have received from different actors in this field, Mr. Speaker, they have even proposed that this definition should even be expanded further to include any act or any action of ejecting a surviving spouse or a child from matrimonial homes or matrimonial properties, and any other action that may be deemed to become unlawful as it concerns with dealing with the deceased person's estate. So that means it will no longer be business as usual once this amendment is enacted. If somebody intermeddles with the estate of the deceased, then it means there will be criminal culpability. It means there will be penal sanction, Mr. Speaker, so that those big brothers, and I apologize for using the big brothers because they are the ones, maybe, or male relatives who have really oppressed widows who are vulnerable and who are busy mourning their husbands, Mr. Speaker, can then now take a back seat and consider whether they can take the criminal sanction that will emanate from such behavior. And that would as well mean, Mr. Speaker, after these amendments are introduced and accepted and adopted, Mr. Speaker, as part of our laws and enacted as such, it will then mean that those widows who have cried for many days, who have been thrown out of their estates, whose children could have been thrown into the streets by other relatives, Mr. Speaker, that will become a thing of the past. We have seen on many occasions that widows will not only be thrown out of the properties, you will even find that some very treacherous relatives or distant relatives have walked in, carted away a vehicle, even carted away movable property, carted away furniture, or even started commotion and very heavy fights, which are even